Thank you, everybody. We're even starting early. This is rare. They know that I'm a compulsive one, and we're always on time, if not early. They call us over-punctual in the German-speaking world. Well, I haven't taught this, I don't think, fully for probably 12 years, so I hope I can say something fresh and refreshing. But I'm eager to teach it. And the amazing thing to me is that as many years as I've known it now, I learned it by accident or providence, I don't know. Already in the early 70s, ended up being one of the first people to learn it for some reason. And here, 30 years later, my appreciation for it would actually be stronger. I'm more convinced there's some amazing truth at work here. And of course, psychologists and therapists and scientists have all been putting out books. You see many of them over here, trying to say, how can this be true? How can it be so true? Because scientifically, we can't prove it. It really is a classic example of a wisdom tradition, an oral tradition that seems to have been lost for many years. In the book, The Christian Perspective, I'm trying to trace some of the history again, and I'm convinced it has originally Christian foundations among the Desert Fathers, and then a Franciscan connection in the 12th, 13th century by a man called Raymond Lull, who was a master evangelist, made 8 trips to the world that we would now think of as the Muslim world, and he was trying to find a lingua franca, whereby, as an evangelist, he could talk to the Muslim world and he could talk to the Christian world and would not offend either one of them, all right? An almost neutral language of conversion or transformation. He got lost in his Ars Magna, his huge set, almost as great as Thomas Aquinas's, in Latin, and really wasn't known. And then got rediscovered. Those good Jesuits brought it back to the West in the early 70s, and I happened to have a Jesuit spiritual director at that time in Cincinnati who taught it to me. And in those first years, we were told we had to keep it an absolute secret. It was only because they didn't want it to be trivialized. It was only to be taught from spiritual director to spiritual director, because they thought that once it became, as it has become, a parlor game, its power would be lost. And now the books pour out. They speak of the Enneagram industry. But I didn't even tape it, even though my friends say I don't have an untaped thought. And yet Helen Palmer came out with her book in the early 80s, or mid-80s, I think it was. And I said, okay, the secret's out. And so the next time I taught it, also in the mid-80s, that was put on tape, and that's the set that made me known in these circles. It's interesting that, and I say this just to help you understand the longing of the world. I hope it doesn't sound like I'm bragging or something, but I keep being invited to give the keynote address or a major address at these international Enneagram conventions. And I've only accepted it twice, but I have to give them a polite excuse every other year or so. And I said to one of them, I said, why do you keep inviting me? I've said whatever I have to say. I do think I sort of know it intuitively at this point. But it amazed me that because it has moved into the business world, it's moved into the education world, it's moved all over the world. In fact, my book tends to be much bigger selling in other languages than in English. I said, why do you want me to talk about it? And the answer is always the same, that even these people who have taken it to rather wonderful but secular levels are recognizing that it's lost much of its power. And that their desire, why they keep inviting me back, is they say, bring us back to the spiritual foundation. Now that's the tack I'm going to be giving you today, which I believe is the original one, and I believe is the authentic approach to the Enneagram. It was a spiritual tradition, totally, entirely. And the years of refinement seem to have been done in the world that we would now call Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, where the Sufi schools of spiritual direction took what I believe was the original capital sins of the Desert Fathers and refined them and made them subtle and helped to understand the patterns between them. Then Raymond Lull, in my opinion, I can't prove all of this, but it's the only links in the chain we can rediscover, seems to have brought it back from the Middle East and the Sufi schools of spiritual direction to the Christian West, but then it got lost in his Latin texts and no one bothered with it. But anyway, we've got it again. And it's, I hope will be a gift for you. And you see the title that I gave it this time is, I believe, a return to its original understanding and even a biblical understanding, the Enneagram as the discernment of spirits. Now, let me spend a little time on that. That word itself might be one not totally familiar to you. In the 12th chapter of 1 Corinthians, Paul speaks of discernment as one of the charismata, one of the original charisms that are absolutely essential for this mystery called church. The discrimination of spirits, if you will. The recognition of the subtlety of the nature of evil. And he seemed to think, as many spiritual directors have recognized over the centuries, if you don't recognize the subtle character of evil, you will be overcome by it, because it's never obvious. I want to actually use, I think the timing on this is good, the Lord of the Rings phenomenon. I don't know how many of you are J.R.R. Tolkien fans, but the original books are a study in the nature of evil and the subtlety of evil. For all of the grandiosity of the three movies, I don't think they approach the book because all the American mind is ready for is spectacle. We love spectacle. But you know, Aristotle said way back when that the very meaning of drama was that drama had to have character development and plot development. And you had to see the subtle relationship between plot and character. And he said the thing that would destroy that subtlety would be spectacle, right? Already, 2,500 years ago. That you get caught up in the spectacular. A battle drama that takes an hour and 10 minutes in the movie, where there's absolute good and absolute evil, which is entirely untrue to what Tolkien is saying. Now, the amazing thing is that most of America is totally happy and gaga over these movies because we like spectacles. But my point here is we no longer understand the discernment of spirits that Tolkien is representing. We don't understand subtlety. We like spectacle. And that's what we're speaking into when we talk about the Enneagram. Why most people trivialize the Enneagram too, because we're not ready for subtlety. And especially that evil has to disguise itself. The very word Lucifer, it means the light bearer, right? The light bearer. The one who carries light. Evil never looks like evil. That's why presidents can sell wars, okay? Because most people are into the spectacular and have no ability to discern anything with any kind of degree of subtlety. And so we continually get sucked into evil. The quote that was put at the top of your schedule, and that is actually at the beginning of my book, is that marvelous line from Corinthians. The angels of darkness must disguise themselves as angels of light. That is sort of the byline in the understanding of the Enneagram. That evil will always look like good. And that's the only reason any of us will do evil. Because we will have ourselves convinced that it's moral, upstanding, patriotic, making the world safe for democracy or something like that. We'll create some rationale to justify our doing of evil. Rilke, the wonderful German-speaking poet, put it well. Maybe this is a good one-line description of the process. Unless you tame your demons, you will never know your angels. I do encourage you to be taking notes because I'm going to be saying a lot today, and most of this is going to be lost by the end of the day if you aren't taking notes on some of this stuff. Unless you tame your demons, you will never know your angels. Now, we're not into, although the West is, but here we're not into killing demons. In the Enneagram, the genius of it, and this is where it's uniquely Christian, we are going to make the devil work for God, okay? We're going to make the devil work for God. That's the genius of it. This model of the total overcoming of evil is what we have in spectacles. Total good guy, total bad guy. But the learning that this energy, which can be used for evil, which in the Lord of the Rings is precisely the ring. A ring isn't a bad thing. It's attractive, all right? You put it on your finger. For us, it's a sign of commitment. But if you've read the Lord of the Rings, all right, the ring is the symbol of power from beginning to end. And in the subtlety of the real story, it's a temptation to everybody in the movie. You'll see people with initial gifts, and then the contact with the ring becomes the temptation to misuse their gift for evil purpose. Even the hobbits who come off crystal clean in the movie are all touched by evil in the original, because you cannot not be touched by it. You cannot not struggle with the temptations of power and the misuse of power. And everybody does. Everybody. There's no exceptions. Even in the movie, you return to the Shire at the end if you've seen it, and everything's idyllic and technicolor and beautiful. That's not true in the book. Frodo returns to the Shire and he says, "This is now as bad as the world of mortals," right? And the greatest temptation in the movie is to try to create an absolutely perfect world, right? That's the illusion of Genesis already. To refuse to live with the tainted, broken, original sin and to struggle with it. That's what created communism, right? An ideological power way to create perfection, supposedly, from the top, to take away all injustice. I mean, communism all started with, forgive me, peace and justice people, all right? People who are very liberal, as it were, right? All wanted peace and justice and thought they could attain peace and justice by power. And if you see the subtlety of the discernment of spirits, it's always pointing out and revealing that subtlety. That as soon as you try to bring about even good things by enforcement, domination, or power, they become a bad thing. But most people can't see that. We can now kill people because we're making the world safe for terrorists. Safe against terrorists, excuse me. Maybe safe for them. Maybe that was right. I don't know. But see, now that's good. That's all good. And all discrimination stops, all discernment stops. Even though at a conference I was just at, a moral theologian pointed out how this war doesn't meet a single criterion of the just war. Cannot be justified on any historic level. But, most of our good Christian, Catholic, every Sunday go to church people bought it lock, stock, and barrel. Because they have no discernment of spirits. They have no ability to discriminate, no ability to recognize the real nature of evil and the real nature of good. I want to say that at the beginning, maybe putting it in too dramatic context to help you understand what we're up against. If we don't teach this kind of discrimination, I think the world will continue to sell itself out to evil. Paul says in Colossians, he stripped the principalities and powers of their phony authority and marched them naked through the streets in his triumph. So stripping them, right, and marching them through the streets is what we're about. It's not killing them, right? You strip them. You expose them for what they are. That's what Martin Luther King was doing. That's what Gandhi was doing. Huh? Make evil show itself. Make the policemen of Birmingham, impose their water cannons on us and make them show that they are people of power, not of peace. This is the ultimate overcoming of evil, to make evil show itself for what it is. Now that's why the Enneagram has been called in many ways a negative system. I'll try to make it entertaining today, but in some ways it isn't entertaining. Huh? I'm going to make fun of every one of you in this room. Huh? And in fact, if you don't suffer that humiliation, if you don't squirm a little bit and say, oh God, he got me, that's me. And that's what I don't want anybody to know. That's what I've always been ashamed of, and that's what I'm trying to cover up. Huh? If you don't feel that by the time you leave here at 6 o'clock, then you didn't get it, right? You didn't get it. If you leave here feeling good about yourself, you didn't get it, all right? You have to feel bad about yourself first. As many have said, yes, the truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable. So today, we're into making you miserable. That's my work. So the gift of recognizing spirits, or distinguishing between spirits, translate it the way you want, is one of the named and original charisms of the Holy Spirit. Without it, and I do believe few people have been trained in it, we constantly confuse good with evil. We call good evil, as Isaiah says, and we call evil good. This has to do, and this is what I'm going to be trying to train you in today, with learning to recognize energies much more than superficial external traits. Now, the only way I'm going to be able to teach this is by giving examples of external traits. And a lot of you are going to stop right there. And that's when it becomes a parlor game, She's an artist, therefore she's a 4. That's too simple. Far too simple, Some 4s are not artistic at all. It must be very hard to be a 4 if you're not artistic. But I actually know some, who aren't naturally creative, but they think in that way inside. They just haven't learned how to translate it into the outer world, you see. So don't look for traits. We want to look for motivations. What's their real form of perception? You're going to find that you all take your reality in through a chosen set of blinders. And we're going to try to explain why there's 9. I know some of you say, why not 8? Why not 6? Why not 7? Why not 15? And there will be those of you walking out the door at 6 o'clock and saying, oh, I'm a perfect 10. No, there's 9. I don't know why there's 9. Well, I do partially know, but I'll say it later. But we're going to teach through the traits, but don't get lost in the external traits. They're just partial giveaways. And when you get good at it, you read energies. I mean, really. And this is the reason that Helen Palmer got into it. She told me herself. I mean, she was a psychic intuitive. And she's convinced that you can train people to be psychic. Well, that's what this was about initially. We didn't use that kind of word in the early centuries, but it was training people to read the soul. How to read the soul. And how to pick up, after a while, you can pick it up by their body movements, by their gestures, by their face, my God. And the more compulsive a person is, the more easy they are to read. You can probably see already that I'm a 1. I'm chopping the air with my gestures, That's the way we do it. We're always chopping reality up somehow, because that gives us some ability to control it. And here I've known this dang thing for 30 years, and I'm still a 1. So I hope that gives you a bit of compassion with yourself and consolation. I know some of you won't like the determinism of this, and I don't know why it's true, but you're 1 number. And you're going to be that until the day you die. I don't know why, But I think it's the shape and the name of what the Christian tradition called original sin. I'm convinced of it. That precisely there's a primary flaw And there seem to be 9 basic shapes to this flaw. A primary ill perception. And we're addicted to it is the trouble. We're attached to it. That's why you won't let go of it. All you can do is move it to some level of consciousness, which on my first tapes I called the level of redemption, where you see through it. You laugh at it. And I'm going to try to help you laugh at it today, because until you can laugh at it, you're not going to be free from it. You see, if you try to attack it, you know what you'll do, right? You will attack it with the same energy that you are, which will only double the energy, right? In other words, I try to make myself not a 1 by being a 1. That's the only way I know how to do anything, you know? So I approach my oneness with oneness. That's driving out the devil by the prince of devils, to use Jesus' language, all right? Which is the only way the world understands. So we're going to overcome Iraq by Iraq's methods, which makes us Iraq in mirror energy. No one can see that except people of discernment and people of spiritual understanding. Without it, you can have 3 PhDs, all right? And you won't see it. You won't. That's why conversion and repentance was tied up not with education, but with transformation. Education is not the same as transformation. Education is not the same as conversion. In the spiritual life, in fact, having 3 PhDs here, I'm saying this on a college campus where Dominicans are in charge, you know, but education in the spiritual life is not necessarily an advantage. In fact, good Franciscan tradition would say it's very often a disadvantage, because it gives you, in fact, more trust in your head that you can figure this out, right? That you can explain this and control this and understand this. So transformation, repentance, conversion is on a very different track than mere education. Now, I think we could say that the Enneagram is a psychological explanation of what the church calls original sin. Although, I want to counter that right away by saying that this is not primarily psychological. We in the West tend to, after the last century, since Freud especially, we tend to like the psychological categories. And we think that they're almost the final explanation. No offense to the therapists in the room, but as many others have said, all problems are today interpreted psychologically in America, but the real solutions are almost always spiritual. Spiritual is a bigger realm than psychological, because the individual psyche is precisely that. It's too individualistic. It's too tiny. It's too small. It's text outside of context. It's individual outside of participation. And that's good as far as it goes. But a therapist without some contact with cosmos, with what we would call spirituality, really doesn't have that much finally to say. So anyway, the Enneagram seems to have been a recognition in Christianity and especially in Sufi Islam. Although it took the form in the Jewish Kabbalah too. So all 3 monotheistic religions seem to have recognized its wisdom historically. They said that there is a primary blindness in each of us. By today's words, we'd probably call it a primary addiction. And what we're addicted to, sorry to say, although happy to say, is primarily yourself, right? It's called egocentricity. And until that egocentricity, that foundational egocentricity is broken, I have no reason to believe that you will not read all of life through personal self-interest, right? And that's why I can't even fashion this in terms of self-growth, right? Because and that's where I would say most of the teachers are teaching it today. And what does that do? That appeals to your self-interest, right? How can I grow, right? How can I become more whole? don't even read me on that level, because that's not the level in which we're going to be talking today. That might happen. In fact, it will happen as a corollary. But do understand it as a corollary. It's just a sort of side advantage. Now, we, perhaps you remember it, in the Christian tradition, we did speak of 7 capital sins. Although Raymond Lull and Evagrius Ponticus and others, they had 8 already. And it's very interesting that in all 3 historic paradigms that I just mentioned, the one that is missing in every case is what we now call the 6th type, or fear. You know why? Because fear is so omnipresent in all of our lives. Fear is so constant and universal. Fear is the almost exact opposite of faith. We're all living inside of our fears to some degree, that none of the ancients seem to be able to recognize fear for the unique capital sin that it also is. In other words, there are some people, and ironically, it's the biggest number of all. Many teachers that I'm working with say that 50% of the human race are 6s, right? At least. It's by far the biggest number. We recognize that we couldn't see it. We just couldn't see it because it was everywhere. There are just some people who make an art form out of it. I mean, they really just see everything through their fears. And it's no worse a trap than any other one. But the trouble is, it gets a lot of confirmation, a lot of affirmation. It's called patriotism. It's called militarism. It's called church. It's called dogma. It's called doctrine. I mean, who can knock all that stuff? Religion and military is sort of what makes the world go round. Well, you want to know why? Because sick religion and sick militarism both appeal to the fear type. Basically, people who cannot trust themselves, and so need to belong to a larger, absolutely sure system that is never wrong, like the Roman Catholic Church or the American government. Do you see? I will sell my soul to the church. I will sell my soul to the American government so I don't have to take responsibility for my life. Now, that's a great temptation, and for all of us, I think, but particularly for a fear-based person. Now, these energies, these natural flows within us are hidden. They're deep. They were called passions by the medieval masters. And one had to discern his or her true passion or juice or energy source. And therefore, they were pretty much associated with sin, your passions. It probably still has that negative connotation in most Catholics' minds anyway. But it was called his blindness. His compulsiveness would probably be the psychological word we'd use today. It actually, see, too much of a good thing is a bad thing. You can write that down, right? And what you do when you're young is you over-identify with what you're naturally good at. Why wouldn't you? You play your gift for all it's worth. That's what the teenage years basically mean. And you know what? You have to do it. It's the only way to grow up. You play your strong suit. You play what works for you. Why wouldn't you? You find a style that impresses people or gets you the friendship you want or the security that you want or the power that you want or the control that you want. By the time you're in your 20s, you're expert at it. You're just real good. You're gliding on your gift. Why would you stop it, By that point, it's got you your job. It got you through school. It got you your wife. It worked. There's just no reason at that point to stop doing it. Without being thrown off your horse, you won't. And that's why we say that somewhere in the middle of life's journey, as Dante put it, I enter into the dark wood. I find myself in the dark wood. That has to happen spiritually. Where hopefully, ideally, most commonly, in the present time. It happened somewhere in the 30s. If you're not too rich and too good looking and too famous, if you're too rich and too good looking and too famous, you'll keep pushing it off till your 40s or 50s or 60s or maybe forever. So those of you who are not real good looking and real rich and real famous, you've got a great big head start, all right? Or if you've suffered some kind of failure in your life or some kind of humiliation or some kind of sin. At the beginning of my second book on it, I quote Meister Eckhart, got to quote one Dominican here today. Meister Eckhart says, "One should not repent too much. The value of sin is very great." Wow, no wonder we condemned him, called him a heretic. But listen to Jesus then, to the rich young man. "Why do you call me good? God alone is good. Stop this good stuff. Just stop it, that I'm good. You're not. And I'm going to show you why you're not today, all right? You're not that good. None of you, all right? The best thing you do is for very selfish motives, right? You do it to look good, right? You do it to succeed. You do it to get power. You do it to get people to like you. And I do too. And it's just terrible, But when you stop hating yourself even for that, and you say, I've met the enemy, and the enemy is me, and I guess I'm stuck with it, and apparently for some reason it's called the gospel, God likes it, I guess I can work with it. If God's willing to work with it, I guess I will too, Or Paul's wonderful line in Romans 5:21, where sin abounds, the Lutherans love this, of course, where sin abounds, grace abounds even more. Wow. Good line, huh? Where sin abounds. That's the breakthrough point for grace. Of course it is. Huh? And the Enneagram is going to make that very clear. And then my favorite mystic, Julian of Norwich. First the fall, then the recovery from the fall. And both are the mercy of God. First the fall, and then the recovery from the fall. And both are the mercy of God. None of us were told that the first fall was also the mercy of God. Because it's the hole in the soul, as the alcoholics say. It's the thing that breaks you open. It's got to happen. Sin and salvation are correlative terms. And you don't understand the meaning of salvation. That's why it's sort of useless. And I started there working with teenagers in Cincinnati in 1970. Preaching the full gospel to 16-year-olds. They love it, but they don't do much with it because they haven't sinned yet. You understand? They don't hate themselves enough yet. Huh? They haven't fallen into the hole yet. They haven't found themselves in the dark wood yet. They haven't gone into that endless capacity, as Newman called it, for self-rejection. And only then does the consoling word of good news and unconditional love begin to have redemptive effect. Or begin to make sense. So my goal here is not character building, sorry. Right? It's not personality development, sorry. I know that's what, after the last 40 years, we've all grown used to. And frankly, it's why, we could have offered this to 1,000 people this weekend and would have filled it up. Because they all think it's personality development and character enrichment, And Americans love that, or self-knowledge. Now, it's going to give you some self-knowledge. It's going to give you some character development. But it's almost going to happen on the side, almost by accident. And you're going to know then it's a grace. It was given. It won't come from your effort. It won't come from you figuring it out or working it out. My goal, and that'll be my bias, I hope the whole day, is to move you toward a contemplative awareness. A transformation of consciousness, much more than a development of consciousness. Let me repeat that. A transformation of consciousness, much more than a development of consciousness. And not at all development of ego, but in fact, humiliation of ego. Just the opposite of the way the American mind thinks. A new mind instead of a newly informed mind. Which is what I'm sure you want to leave here today with, all kind of new information. And maybe you will. But it won't be the information itself that will convert you unless it subverts you. And if it subverts you, then it has the possibility to lead you to that new consciousness. So all I can do today is inform the calculative mind, as I call it, which is your normal, educated, psychological mind that all of you operate out of. I'm going to inform that mind so it will stop trusting itself so much, stop relying on itself so much, stop thinking it can figure it out, and you'll let go of the calculative mind. That's my term in the book, Everything Belongs. The two big minds, the calculative mind and the contemplative mind. And until you subvert the calculating mind, normally you cannot fall into the new consciousness, which we call the contemplative mind. Too much concern for self-development or ego development or personal self-knowledge will actually keep you inside of the calculating mind. So we just need a strong enough sense of ourselves, and this is the task of the first half of life. You need a strong enough sense of yourself to finally confront total reality. So it seems that we use our, what Ernest Becker calls our character armor. Now some of you are going to ask, well, where did this character armor come from? Is it nature? Is it nurture? Did my mom do it to me? Did my dad do it to me? Did America do it to me? The only honest answer I can give is I don't know. I really don't know. But I know you get it real early, all right? And the answer I've been given over in Europe is just to resolve the dualistic split. I just say it's 1/3 nature, 1/3 nurture, and 1/3 free choice. Maybe at a minimal level of freedom. But I can remember as a little boy already wanting to be a good boy, right? Wanting to be a little goody two-shoes and doing everything right, all right? That's a 1, all right? Now, no doubt I was preconditioned for that by my mother especially, you know? And no doubt my Catholic experience told me that you should be a good boy. So I had all these wonderful justifications for being a good boy, you know? But in fact, I chose it, I think, at some level of subliminal consciousness. So I hand you that for whatever it's worth or however it might help you. What the Enneagram wants to say, you can write this down, you are destroyed by your gift. You are destroyed by your gift. No one ever thought of that, all right? The very thing that you think is your strong point is the thing you will over-identify with. It becomes your set of blinders. You overplay your cards. And normally, by the middle of the 30s, it should start showing itself to you. A lot of people in the early years started teaching this to high school kids, and it goes right over their heads. All it can be is a parlor game. Because, again, they haven't sinned enough yet. Jesus has this wonderful line, many lines in Jesus, shows he understood this basic pattern of discernment and disguise. He said, the stone that the builder rejects is in fact the cornerstone. In the building, in the constructing of your personality, your ego, your successful persona, there have been a few things that you decided to eliminate. Like I don't ever want to look like I'm bad. I don't want to ever look like I'm selfish because that wouldn't fit my public image of, especially now being a priest, it's even worse, You can see why so many people get trapped. But each one of you has a certain thing that you reject. We call it the shadow self now. It's not really the evil self. It's simply the unacceptable self. If you're a 3, you just cannot accept public humiliation and failure. You've got to look good. And so you become an efficiency expert at just, organizing, mechanizing, greasing the wheels of life and everything. So you always look like this knight on a white horse, a fair-haired boy who can do everything right. And you are, but you aren't. And so God, somewhere in your life has to get you off that white charger. So you stop charging into life and help you see that the stone that you rejected, you're weeping over failure, your acceptance of failure, that you're a little man like everybody else. That has to happen to you. And that will become the cornerstone of your strong and true and integrated personality. That's it in one line. You can leave now. You've got it. All right? Nothing more to teach you all day. All right? The two wants to think of himself as so loving, you know? And he or she has got to weep over the recognition that all of his lovingness is to get people to love him back. Huh? Oh my God, that's humiliating for a two. To recognize that all of their attempts to serve and to help are from a self-centered purpose. Until they face that, they will not find the cornerstone that builds the integrated and beautiful personality that they can be, and they will be. Now, do you see what we're up against in an arrogant culture like ours, which never wants to face humiliation because our whole country is 3 energy. America is a 3 country. Poor 3s have a hard time getting converted if you're an American, because it's called success. It's the only name of the game. It's the American typology. The whole world sees it, except once you fly into the United States, you can't see it anymore. Oh, I was so glad when the war started, I was out of the country, you know, and you could hear it. Oh, there go those Americans again with simplistic answers, you know, for complex things, because that's the way the 3 reads life. Always very simplistically, good and bad. So if you're unwilling to bear, to carry that ego humiliation that comes in the middle of life, sometimes earlier, sometimes later, you will not move toward total reality. Now, when I say total reality today equals God, same thing. That's, we who are believers simply use the word God, but people who don't believe, they'll use the word total reality, perhaps, or force, or something else. The irony is, brothers and sisters, that we actually frustrate in ourselves and for ourselves what we want the most. I don't know why we do this. This is what's damnable about human nature. We really are our own worst enemy. We're a living contradiction, it seems, acting at cross purposes to our own best intents and purposes. We need to know how we are our own worst enemy. And that's what I'm going to try to help you see today, so that you can flow with your gift and also integrate your sin, your shadow, your failure, that which you're afraid of, the stone which you have rejected. The contradictions that we are must be overcome by both affirming them and countering them almost simultaneously. Affirming that broken side as the place of the wound. And that's why we are the religion of the wound, that says it's through the wound that we are healed, through the wound that we come to God. This is the art form of the Enneagram. It simply teaches you how to do that. In that sense, I'm just amazed that some people can think this is New Age or pagan. It's anything but. It's Christian to the core in my understanding of it. But it's at a level of Christianity that I think, frankly, an awful lot of Christians have not wanted to go. We've all created a survival strategy. We've all created a strategic self, a marketable self, a personal manager that we have to fire. And this personal manager is in rather total control of you. And he has told you how to manage yourself for so many years, you don't want to fire him, because he's sort of working. What we hope for is that he fails. Teresa of Avila had so many wonderful lines, but she said, the sinner is actually one who does not love himself or herself enough. He or she does not see or admire this whole self that we are. And so we split. We try to love the good self and reject the bad self, and we get into this dualism that characterizes most Western people. Instead of this suffering of reality, this bearing of the burden of the two sides of the mystery that we are. Allowing, as Jesus puts it in Matthew 13, the field of weeds and wheat to grow together until the harvest. That's a one-liner from Jesus himself. So don't report me to the bishop, all right? Let the weeds and wheat grow together until the harvest. And don't go and try to pull out the weeds. Because if you do, Jesus says, you'll destroy the wheat along with it. My God, that's brilliant. Why didn't we hear that? Because the calculating mind is always a dualistic mind. It only can read reality in terms of either or. Good guys, bad guys, absolute evil and absolute good. That's why Peter Jackson did what he did with Tolkien's book. That's the best he can do. Is spectacular battle scenes. And that reflects the readiness of our mind, I think. We must notice, brothers and sisters, how we each block ourselves by a preferred style of perception. A preferred style of perception. And that style of perception has become your way of getting your energy. And it works for you. But what I want to point out, if I can today, is, to use a physical image, it's white gas. You know, your car can go on it, but it's finally going to destroy the car. And it ain't going to drive real well on cheap gas. And what we're going to try to do today is take that white gas out and at least show you how to get access with ethyl supreme that doesn't knock or whatever. You know, the real good stuff. It seems that what we do, we actually subvert, and this has to be our original sin. We actually subvert our pleasure and our enjoyment. I'm going to say this, and this will sound too naive to some of you, but it'll make sense, I hope, by the end of the day. If you're not enjoying life at a foundational level, you're not doing it right. You're involved in this approach avoidance, going with the energy and attacking it and hating yourself for it, always at the same time. Most people I know live with one foot on the accelerator and one foot on the brake. Do you see? The guilt and the shame and the fear, they've all been, I shouldn't be this way, but I am, but I don't know how to get rid of it. I'll just keep confessing it or hating myself for it, which profits you nothing. When you're living life right, you will enjoy life. I'm not saying there won't be sufferings and difficulty and hardships, but even underneath those, there's a foundational happiness, a foundational contentment that I am who I am, and it's okay. And God is using all of me, to bring me to God. And I don't spend any time now splitting or projecting or avoiding or denying. Because it is what it is, and I am what I am. Good and bad put together into one self. And God's mercy is so great, and God's love is so total, that God uses even your sin in your favor. Right? That's it. God will use even your so-called dark side to bring you to God. Tell me what the gospel would be if it's not that. Tell me. What would be good news? All the rest of it is not good news. Most that has been handed to me as good news is bad news. Because it's still based on somehow getting rid of something that, damn it, I can't get rid of, right? And so you just live with this terrible, constant self-hatred, which has almost come to be the characteristic of the West. There's this constant, deep self-hatred and self-rejection. The sinner is actually one who does not love himself or herself enough. And so I hope on the other side we can increase this love of yourself, of this self that almost appears like a self-created cartoon character. And we're going to make it look like a cartoon. I'm going to make simplistic jabs at all of them today. But maybe all 100% of it doesn't apply to you. But I'll bet 10% does, probably 60%. Huh? And here's what's even worse. Your compulsive self is actually what people admire you for. It's what people applaud you for. It's how you got your job, all right? It's what made you look good. So why change it? Unless you really want the truth, unless you really want God. And that's why it's very hard to convert people in the first half of life. You're mostly wasting your time up to 35. Forgive me for you young ones, but it's just, hey, I got to ride it for a while yet, And you've got to let them ride it for a while. But it's why you sort of roll your eyes at your teenagers sometimes, Oh, God, he's going down such a dead end, but he's got to do it, And you just hope you can contain them enough or hold them enough that they don't self-destruct. But by my age, you just see right through what most young people are doing. It's just, okay, I did it too. And someone held on to me, someone believed in me or loved me. Now, let's start moving into the three big areas. That's a big overview. I'll keep coming back to it in various forms. As you know, the 9 types, let's draw our big circle up here that you've seen many times. Look at that, pretty good. All right. If you want to know why they're 9, by the way, it's because, and this has been confirmed and reconfirmed on so many levels, psychological, spiritual, traditional teaching, because the 3 Trinitarian parts, and it does mirror Trinity, by the way, of the human person are mind, right, and spirit and heart. Now, there's different words used for that, and I'll give you some of those different words. But in some way or another, those seem to be the 3 parts of the person. And before you hone in on your deliberate number, I want you to see the traps of the 3 areas in particular. How you can be trapped in the head, how you can be trapped in the heart, and how you can be trapped in the gut or the body, if you want to call it that, really. Now, the pure entrapment, when I was first taught it, these poor people, they have a double compulsion. You're all going to hate yourself if you're one of these numbers. If you're a 9, if you're a 3, or if you're a 6. Those are the pure sins, if you will, in concentrated, distilled form. Because you see why even what we're going to call the wings, it doesn't make sense yet, but the numbers on each side of you, or even your wings are inside of that compulsive space. These people, these gut people, are all into their body self, their instinctive self. We call it gut. And the response to reality is an immediate gut response to it. These heart people are all into their feelings and their emotions and what other people think of them and how other people respond to them. And the poor 3 in the middle, that's all he or she has is what are people going to think? What are people going to, are they going to love me or are they going to admire me? Are they going to promote me? And the poor 6 is totally into their head, which they, of course, call common sense or something like that, But the head becomes their absolute security system and their absolute control tower, where they're constantly defending themselves from reality. Now, what I want to say at this early point is that all 3 of these, in their generalized form, substitute their game for authentic contact with what is. The head people substitute thought and thought systems and patterns of thought that they've now become used to for authentic contact with reality, for what is, for educated feeling, deep, honest, holistic intuition. So they never really connect with what is on an instinctual, honest level. It's always via their head trip. Got it? Everything goes first to the mind, and then if it passes muster up there, maybe they'll actually meet you. No, not you, but the categories of you, or my fear of you, or my explanation of you. Now, we all do this, by the way. But again, the head people have just made an art form out of it, which is why any contemplative teacher or prayer teacher is trying to tell you to disassociate with this damn head. Because the head is the ultimate control tower, and the head can't get you there. You cannot be present to what is through your head. Let me repeat that. You cannot be present to what is through your head. But head people think they can, and that finally becomes a paralysis for them. Heart people, you'd think these are all gushy, little feeling, warm people. Well, yes, but no. I'm going to say something that's going to seem actually shocking. These so-called feeling people, 2, 3, and 4, they don't have feelings at all. You know why? Because they have everybody else's. They don't know what they really feel. That's why the 4 is striving to be authentic. That's why the 3 is doing this endless dance to try to live up to everybody else's feeling response or a feeling need for them. And why the 2 is constantly, running into your world and invading your space to try to help you because they don't know who they are. And so they've got to pretend that they know who you are and what you need. So again, even the heart person doesn't really contact what is, what's right in front of them. They look like feeling people, but they're one step removed, and a very significant step removed, from authentic contact with reality. It is always via other people's feelings, which are themselves pseudo-feelings, usually. Do you understand? So we're walking around with our phony feelings, and then the 3 is taking those on. Well, the poor 3, no wonder, he is so insecure and so unstable on many levels because he's 2 steps removed from reality. Then finally, before the break, let me say the same thing about myself, us gut people. Oh, we're a case, What we do is we absolutely abort our contact with reality, which is experienced through authentic feelings. Now, that needs education. Don't take that too glibly, By making previous judgments as to the meaning of the event. And that previous judgment is held in our body. We have an immediate like or dislike for everything. Everything. Oh, I wish I weren't that way. We immediately know whether it's okay or it isn't okay. All right? Reality comes at us gut people like a shock wave. Just one shock wave after the other. Everything is too much for us. It's, how do I relate to that? Because we take it on like a full body blow, So what we do is we once decide, okay, I'll just control it and be perfect all the time, and I'll just relate to good people, or I'll just be a good person or something. I don't know what we do. What the 8 does is just punch it out. Just keep punching it out, attacking it back. Get out of my way. Get out of my way. Because I can't take it. And the 9 people are the honest. They just, oh my God, it's too much. And so they just back off. So you see how it's the pure form? It's just too much. This full body blow every 3 minutes. You've got to know that to understand gut people. Life is a full body blow every 3 minutes. And we've learned a survival technique to try to contain that much energy. So there you got it. Now that's very oversimplified, but I wanted to give you the big picture before we now move into the parts. A goodness grown to a pleurisy dies in its own too much. A goodness grown to a pleurisy dies in its own too much. That's what we're saying. And Shakespeare knew it. Of course, he was a 4. And 4s have this amazing ability to naturally discern spirits. Both 4s and 5s do. They're the best at it. Some of us have found great wisdom in recent years by Eckhart Tolle's Wisdom from the Power of Now. I want to read a quote from him about this loving of our own unhappiness, this attachment to our own unhappiness. He calls it the pain body. And he says we live inside of our own pain body and we choose it. Most human beings would rather be in pain, be the pain body, than take a leap into the unknown and risk losing the familiar but unhappy self. The familiar but unhappy self. We would rather have the familiar and the habitual than pay the price of liberation. He says, observe the peculiar pleasure you derive from being unhappy. Observe the compulsion to talk or think about it or fix it. See, it gives you a task. It gives you someone to be angry at today. It gives you energy to do your work. Anger really works. It's great energy. It gets me through many of the days of my life. Now, the resistance will cease if you make it conscious. And so that's what Tolle says, and I think he's right. And I wanted to quote that at the beginning because that's largely what we're doing today, is exposing the demon by saying, as Jesus always did at every exorcism, show yourself. We would say today, bring it to consciousness. Once it's even partially conscious, the game's over, at least in part. Once you see how silly this is, why do you keep beating yourself on the head and thinking that the effect is going to be different? It's going to always keep being the same because it's the way you process reality. Now, I'm going to take another time to just keep talking general. Because if I do a lot of the general talk, when I get into the specific numbers, they're going to make a lot more sense. I'd also like to correlate what I'm going to try to say today with what I've said in other places about the true self, false self. I know some of you were at that conference and that's out on tapes too, but I want to say that now because in this teaching, would like to correlate this with true self, false self, instead of what I did on my first set of tapes 20 years ago, where I called them the redeemed and the compulsive. And those words are still okay, but the word redeemed still connotes too churchy language for some people. But I'm going to say the true self is really the whole self, what I described earlier as good and bad. And that's on a continuum with the false self. But this does not make the false self bad. This is the container that you use to start learning from. That's all. Got it? And you're never going to kill the total false self, nor should you. All right? You've just got to learn how to use it. Remember? We're going to use the devil to get to God, but it isn't really the devil. Here's where language breaks down. So formerly I called this the compulsive self, if you like that, and I call this the redeemed self. And in each of these numbers, you're somewhere on a continuum between freedom and compulsiveness at any one point. And I don't think it's a straight line, that once you get it, you stay there. There have been times where I thought, gosh, I'm really beyond my one. I'm not a one. And then next month, I'm back into it again. It just never goes away. It just takes new forms. And in fact, the older you get, it just takes more cleverly disguised forms. That's all. It gets real clever at hiding itself. I would say that only the true self is strong enough to let go of the false self. And that's why this is inherently a spiritual system. Without what I would call some initial God encounter, some falling into the larger self, who you are in God and who God is in you, the little tiny self, the little Richard self, is not secure enough, content enough, happy enough to let go of this. It needs all these games too much. But the true self just doesn't need to be famous or doesn't need to be rich or doesn't need to be good looking to be happy. You've found it at a deeper level, and you can let go of all those external things. You see why we're just set up in our country for huge cultural problems, because basically we've got a giant system of advertising and merchandising that entirely sells people in the false self. And boy, when that starts falling apart for this, let's say the baby boomer generation, what are they going to do? It's frightening, really, because they will create more and more control freak systems, more and more compelling, compulsive systems to get what they want, because the false self is so needy, so absolutely needy, moment by moment by moment. And we're seeing this in the neurotic character of so much of our public life. That the self needs constant adulation, needs constant affirmation, needs constant promotion, needs constant money to tell itself that it is something, which shows by definition that it isn't something yet. It's only the false self that would want all of that. So I do think in that sense the Enneagram is inherently religious language. It is prepared to tell you that the only way out of your Enneagram compulsion is by some kind of authentic religious experience. Some kind of authentic God experience is the only thing that will secure you enough to allow you to be insecure. Right? That's all. Nothing else will. So the true self is the non-needy, non-compulsive, non-unconscious self that emerges from conscious union with God. It's really, if you want an earlier, rather constant word for it, it's the soul. And the soul is given. It's not created. It's the place within you where God objectively abides and has nothing to do with your performance or your worthiness. It's just there. Now your readiness to participate in it, to enjoy it, is a different thing. The false self is the psychological self, the past self, created by what you have done and what has been done to you by others. I think we will continue to be a litigious society, suing people and all this because everybody else made me do it. And it's mother's fault and it's his fault and her fault. Instead of finally saying, I am what I am, good and bad. And even this wound that I carry, there's no point in blaming anybody for it. Now I carry it. It's my wound, right? And I better deal with it. And you can sue for $10 million, right? And that isn't going to change the nature of your soul. In fact, it might well confirm you in your righteousness, your superiority, and your supposed purity. That my abuser was the impure person. I'm the pure person. You see how this even knocks politically correct thinking, huh? That you can divide the world into perfect bad people and perfect good people. I am now participating in this badness. Yes, maybe it was that person's fault. Maybe that person rightfully needs to be restrained. But don't think that by restraining him, I've solved my soul problem, right? I still have to do my growing up. And we are caught in a huge kind of victimology today that is getting us, in my opinion, nowhere, because it's always outside the self that the problems of the self are trying to be resolved through changing other people, suing other people, hating other people, or killing other people through our wars. So the true self is non-acquired. The false self is the acquired self. And yet what I want to say, brothers and sisters, it's that acquired self that you're attached to, damn it. Damn it, and I use damn it rightly, all right? Whereas the soul, the non-acquired self, which is indestructible, which is the basis for all of your joy and all of your security, that for some terrible reason you're not attached to, right? And that's even more, the more secular our society becomes. The false self is who I think I am and have learned to need to be. It all has to do with the thinking. I might also say, no offense to anybody, but the false self, the acquired self, is the talkative self. Right? It talks too much. It's always got to... And there's a place for telling your story. There's a place for describing it all. But don't think that by more describing, right? By 10 more hours with a therapist in describing my inner states, you're going to get to the true self. In many ways, it attaches you even more because you've spent so much damn time talking about it, right? And what characterizes the true self is silence. It's beyond words. I don't need to prove it to anybody. I don't need to defend it to anybody. I don't need to find the right words. And I would almost use that as a litmus test. The more you're capable of creative silence, I don't need to fill every moment with chatter, with more talk. I think you're moving more toward the true self. And the false self, the words are almost a way of shoring me up, of validating me, of asserting me, of saying, I'm significant here, notice me. My words are good, or whatever it might be. Here I am, Mr. Talk himself, saying this, always talking, but that's precisely how I got to see it, that I got to know this talking is not good for me, which is why, in terms of my own soul, why, because I'm in the public forum, I need to be a hermit as much as possible on the other side, where I don't talk and I stop talking, because this talking too much defines me as significant, as smart, as wise, or all these self-images that I can take on myself or you can project onto me. The true self is beyond words. It doesn't need them. Now, remember, I've got to repeat one more time, you don't kill the false self. That only enhances it if you try to kill it. I'm going to give you 3 steps. First step, you disidentify with it. And we're going to try to facilitate that disidentification today by exposing it for the silliness that it is. But I want you to say that you disidentify with it largely by observation, not judgment. This is crucial. See, observation creates what we call the subject-object split. You have to teach this in Contemplation 101, where I now stand over here and I watch my thinking mind. I watch my stream of consciousness, and I see it almost as an objective observer. We call it a free witness or a fair witness. He witnesses to it fairly, not judging it good or bad, just, oh, that's what's happening. Oh, that's what I'm doing. And then you start seeing, for example, how often you do the same thing, which is why Eckhart Tolle says 93% of human thought is repetitive and useless. That you tend to have 3 or 4 patterns by the time you're middle age, and you just run those patterns into the ground. And those neural grooves take over by the time you're my age, and you just keep thinking the same thing over and over again. That's why most people aren't very interesting to talk to. They aren't. It's the same canned response, always fear, always caution, she's a 6, it's always, but a redeemed 6 or a true self 6, you'll sense a freshness, a liberation, a something that is much larger than fear, and you recognize they've so disidentified with it. You know what? They actually are better at overcoming fear than the rest of us. That's the amazing thing that happens, The overcoming of your sin will become your strongest gift. 3s are lovers of integrity to an amazing degree. I want to do it honestly. I want to be truthful. One of my greatest friends back in Cincinnati, he was like a son to me. He'd always come to me and say, Richard, don't let me bullshit. Don't let me bullshit. And 3s are masters at bullshit, as are 8s, But they... He knew he could do it so well, he could sell himself. And see, what 3s do is they sell you themselves, which is usually easy to do because they're almost always good looking. And then after they've sold you themselves, then they sell you their product, And they got you, They're always salesmen because they're naturally good at it. Why shouldn't they be? But then when they've seen that sometimes they've sold the wrong thing, or they've sold themselves instead of the truth, they move toward this endless desire for integrity and truth. But that only comes after the disidentification. So we call this also the watching it with the third eye. The fair witness of the third eye. To see yourself objectively, I got to repeat it one more time, without judgment. And you who were raised in the church, that's very hard to do. Very hard. Because you want to give it a moral connotation. Good, bad, up, down. Worthy of grace, worthy of condemnation, or so. Just stop it. That's all an ego trip. The ego needs to position everything and put it in a pecking order. The soul doesn't. Believe me on that. The soul does not need to position everything up and down in terms of better, best. She's better looking, she's not so good looking, so I don't want to see her soul, which is what exactly happens. I can't see her soul because I'm so trapped at good lookingness, which is the superficial false self. So you disidentify. Step 2, and this is where faith and prayer come in. You have to identify with another source and another energy. You have to find another ground on which to stand. What, Archimedes, give me a place to stand on a lever and I can move the whole world. I got to have a different place to stand than my Richard self and its momentary hurts. I just got humiliated. Now, if I just sit here inside of Richard and do a pity party, that someone just humiliated me, all right? You're a trapped person, all right? No truth will come from that moment. No grace will come from that moment. No liberation for yourself or anybody else. You've got to disidentify. I'm doing the pity party thing, all right? Second, I've got to stand in a larger self. We call it falling into the hands of God or handing it over to God. Use your religious language that you use. Most people, you know what most people's language is? I prayed. That's what they're saying. I prayed, God help me. That's good. I mean, that's what you're asking for. I can't do this now. I'm trapped inside my feelings of hurt. I can't get out of it. God help me. Help me to speak civilly and even with grace back to this person who seemed to just make fun of me. You know, it's hard to do. Sometimes you have to do it real quickly. So you have to hand it over to God and hand yourself over to God. You have to stand in a different place. Then, thirdly, you take back, this is going to feel like a surprise, you take back the appropriate energy of the false self and integrate it into a single I. And you do so from one center of operation, without judgment or without inner conflict. That is the peace and contentment you see in the saints. Because you're not fighting the wound anymore. You're not rejecting the wound. You just suffered the wound. Do you understand? This is subtle. Don't fall asleep now, all right? You suffered the ego humiliation. She just sort of made fun of me, right? And it does hurt. Who of us can deny that? And it'll take years of practice to compartmentalize and to know how to move apart, but to also move back. And I've got to say that. You know why. You good therapists know why. I'm not talking about a game of denial. I've still got to own the hurt. As some say, don't forgive too quickly or too glibly or too soon. It still does hurt, but the disidentification allows it not to possess you. There's an I here that can have the feeling. Right? And you've got to find that I, that autonomous I hidden with Christ in God, the larger self. And that self, the humiliation just rolls off your back like water off a duck's back. It doesn't hurt you. It doesn't have much power to hurt you. But the false self is highly hurtable. Now, you're going to have to practice that for years, right? Don't think you'll learn that today, because you've become attached and practiced in the first form of the knee-jerk reaction. She kicks me, I kick her right back. And then you both remain in your false self. You both remain in your tiny self and your worst self, and the world never grows up, which is our world that we live in. So it's almost a kind of, the third space, the moving back, is what some have called the effort of non-effort. You stop trying at that point to figure it out, to psychologize it, to justify it, to rationalize it, to legitimate why you're right and she's wrong, or whatever it might be. You come to this place of a kind of surrender. That it is what it is, and it's what is that will bring me to God. And it's what is that will always teach me, not what isn't. See, we spend all our time fighting things that don't exist but should exist. And it's what exists. Maybe it's the deepest meaning of the incarnation. It finally keeps us and brings us to God. Anything which keeps you from enjoying and living in the present moment, we call it resistance, will leave you in the split self. Our word for the split self was the diabolical self. Diabolein in Greek means to be thrown into two. The diabolical is always the split self. So you have to come back to the true self, which is always the one self. Who I am. But now there's an ability to stand back, look at it, not judge it, not hate it, and therefore to reconnect with it, but now not to be controlled by it. It's an art form, I have to admit, and I don't think a high percentage of people work at it too long because it's too much work. Right? This is the real work. And what we've done is stop people. I'll use a graphic example. Just don't look at Playboy, So no Playboys in my life or Playgirls, no dirty pictures. Just keep dirty pictures over here, all right? And so what we end up with is willpower Christianity. It's Prometheus as our God, not Jesus, right? Who suffers the reality instead of compartmentalizing it permanently. He owns it and lets it own him, as it were, but is not possessed by it. Maybe own isn't the really best word. Someone said, the last thing humans will let go of is their suffering. We manufacture a set of expectations about ourselves that are required for us to be happy. And you do that. You probably had them for coming here today. And you're going to like this day or not like this day, depending on how much I fulfill those expectations. Now, I can understand that. We all do that. But know when you do that, when you have a mental set of what I need to be happy, you're basically going to live an unhappy life. Right? You have set yourself up for constant, continuous unhappiness because your ego is imposing its template on reality. And when that doesn't come back to you, you will be unhappy. You see what power you've put outside yourself? Everybody else is in control of your life. That's why all three of these are you're all being jerked around by everybody else instead of drawing your life from within. That I define my happiness. I define my truth, which can only be done, in my opinion, inside of the true self. Expectations will never be met. You will just keep hammering yourself on the head and blaming other people the rest of your life. When you are foundationally joyful, when you're doing it right, you will have momentarily, at least, probably not long term, but momentarily, you will have overcome your compulsiveness. You'll be living, frankly, by a life not your own. That's it. You'll be living by a life not your own. You will be, to use our English phrase very well, you're a larger-than-life person at that moment. You really are. There is a knower within you. There is a lover within you who knows who you really are and loves who you really are. That's the soul, if you just want to use that term, instead of the true self. And when you can let that do the knowing and that do the loving, you will be content. You will be able to live without disguise, sort of a naked, simple, and clean life, where you can enter into the pain of the world, but you don't let it carry you. You don't let it define you or possess you. Now, back to the three centers again. Because there are clearly these three centers to the human person, they also seem to take three forms. That's how we get 9. And I know it still sounds a little clever. Huh? There is what I'm going to call, what I already called, forgive me, the compulsive center number, the double compulsion. The center point is pure compulsion, the 3, the 6, and the 9. They are actually most masked from themselves. It's very hard for them to be converted. They have the hardest time getting out of it in a certain way because they are so totally enmeshed in it. Life is a constant shock wave of heart. For the 3, a constant shock wave of body, gut. For the 9, a constant shock wave of head trips for the 6. The 3 shock points, you can just call them that if you want, where even the wings, as I said, confirm their compulsiveness. The 3 is so trapped in their feeling world that what they do to get out of this feeling world is they move toward the world of action in the 3, service in the 2. It ironically shows that this world of feeling is so confusing to them. And they don't know how to put boundaries up to it. Which are mine and which are hers? And who am I? They're constantly asking. The 4 enters into a world of aesthetic enhancement. I don't know all these feelings floating around. I'll just make it pretty, right? They're into decoration, right? They're into aesthetic sublimation through words and colors. And it works for them. For the 4, you don't understand a 4 until you know that the metaphor is actually more real than the reality. The rightly chosen phrase or word is better than the thing that the word points to. I don't care about the thing in itself, the ding on sick. It's just the symbol. Oh, they die for symbols, you know. They just love this world of fantasy, because it's their only way. You see, the symbol can control that endless floating feeling in their life. So there's 3 different dances. In a certain sense, since I'm on the heart space, the 3 is the pure compulsion. I'm going to call the preceding number in each case the obvious compulsion. You see it too, and you just know that they're filled with feelings. You actually don't know it so much with the 3. That's why they themselves can't see it. They sometimes don't look like heart people. They're efficiency experts. That's what I mean, that it's masked even from themselves and from you. In the preceding number, it's the obvious compulsion, if you will. They're obviously heart people. In the following number, in this case the 4, it's the conflicted number. A conflicted number. In other words, they've created a little disguise and a little game, even from themselves, for a clever way of controlling their feelings or their head or their gut. That'll become clearer as the day goes on. This is very, very important to understand. That in each case it's true. And why, as we go around the circle, the numbers pattern into one another. I still don't understand the genius of this thing. Why it could be so cleverly defined. And yet not only do they meld into one another and overlap into one another and participate in one another, but what you're going to see if we get enough time by the end of the day, the flip number will be right next to you too to balance you out. Something that's exactly the opposite. The 8s are the ultimate hard people, and right next to them they got the ultimate happy people, the 7. It's always true as you go around the whole number. So the previous number is the focused and obvious form of the compulsion, utterly committed to heart, head, or gut. The 5 is such a head person, always into their words and ideas and theories and ideologies and books and explanations. The 8 is so trapped in his body response. That's why he's just kicking back all the time. He doesn't know how to get out of his instinctual self, his body self. And so he takes it out on you, literally, because it's too much. It really is too much. The conflicted numbers, to run back to them just quickly again, the 2 is obvious feeling. The 5, as I just mentioned, is obvious head. Head. The 8 is obvious body. The 1, we are conflicted gut. I get that constant shock wave of reality that's just too much. Don't know how to handle it. We take it all in a holistic way, and it is too much. The way I've decided to handle it is I'm going to sort of reform it and fix it. Do you understand? We're natural reformers. That's why I'm here today, reforming you. Do you see I'm being a one? We're natural teachers. We're rearranging it. We're always rearranging the room, you know? And making it more clean and more perfect. Mr. Clean is our patron saint. Did you know that? And it's our little way. We can't clean up the whole of America, so I'll clean my bathroom. And that's my one little area of being in control. But do you see the conflict there? I'm fighting my gut response to reality. Whereas the 8 just goes with his gut response for good and for evil. So conflicted is the preceding number. Pure number is in the middle. And the obvious is... Oh, did I say preceding? Yeah, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, said it wrong. The obvious is the preceding, and the conflicted is the following. Yeah. You got it. Okay, the preceding number in each case, like here, is the obvious energy. It's so visible. The 5s and the 2s and the 8s, you can pretty much pick them out, you know. The 2s even talk with seductive, sweet voices, you know. They're on the make all the time. They're always on the make, you know. All of life is a seduction game, do you see? If you haven't been made fun of yet, you will be. I will. So I don't want to pick on any number more than another. The following number in each case, like me, is a 1. We're the conflicted people. The 7, say something about him or her. You'd never, to look at a 7, think they're a head person. It's the most clever disguise possible. I mean, they're just going to Disneyland every other week. They're dressed in primary colors. They drive yellow cars. They're just so happy and everything's upbeat and positive, and the world is just wonderful. And they refuse to see the downside of anything. But do you see the utter conflict that's going on there? They're actually head tripping constantly about what could go wrong. They've got a strong 6 wing. They're scared in many ways because all head people are scared. And they've found the most clever disguise for fear possible. It's just whistle in the dark. And they go through the whole of their life whistling. You know? And you get sick of the whistling after a while. You don't believe the whistling after a while because it's too much whistling. And you know that they never face the dark. They hate the dark. I have a friend who's a 7. He went to the Passion of Christ last week. And he emailed me and he said, the last hour I just sat with my hands over my eyes. And can you imagine seeing this bloody body of Jesus for a 7? That's just... It's hell itself. He said, I just wanted to run out of the theater just screaming. Because I was with 2 priests. He said I couldn't leave, so I just sat there. I covered my eyes. That's the 7, all right? So we're all conflicted. We're trying to reform the world because we can't bear this much reality. There's that T.S. Eliot line. Humankind cannot bear very much reality. That's true of all 9 types. We've all found a way to block too much reality. Julian of Norwich, again to get back to my favorite, she says, that the reason that God does not want us to sin, it's not that God's created a list of good things and bad things. If you do the bad things, God doesn't like you. Right? She has such a brilliant psychology. She says, the reason God doesn't want us to sin is that when you do sin, which is really just stupid things, it prevents you from seeing yourself as God sees you. In other words, it makes you hate yourself. That's the only reason. God wants you to see yourself as God sees you. Right? God wants you to see yourself. And when you do stupid, self-destructive things, you can't see yourself as God sees you. You get into self-hatred. It's just that's the only reason. God just wants you to see yourself as God sees you. So when you can flow with the good and the true and the beautiful, the positive and not the negative in the good sense, then you can honor this divine image that you are. You can recognize this divine image that you are. So it seems that all sin, or compulsiveness as we're calling it here, comes from an initial self-hating. And plus they also tear down the trust between peoples, Julian says. We don't see the divine image in one another either, because we see she's being so selfish. And then it's hard for me to see that she's an image of God. So she says so beautifully, part of the reason we try to be good and true and beautiful is to make it easier for other people to see God in us. That's all. Not to make ourselves wonderful and famous, but just, my novice master told us that when I was 19. He said, you don't just have an obligation in religious community to be loving, but to make it somewhat easy for the other friars to love you, right? Don't make it so hard for them to love you, Make it. Of course, that just appealed to my goody two-shoes one instinct, That's probably the last thing I needed to hear. So all that happened was my badness went underground. It didn't go away, So, in other words, sin is that which blinds us much more than anything that makes us unworthy. Just get rid of that worthiness game, right? Because your worthiness comes from your soul anyway. Do you understand? You didn't create your worthiness. It's a gift from God. That's what makes you fall in love with God. So stop the worthiness game and recognize that the core of the unmasking of sin is a matter of letting you see your blindness. And we are blind on that level once you can see correctly, and that the good includes the non-good, then it becomes so much easier to love, so much easier to accept and to fight, and to stop fighting, everybody else. St. Augustine says at the beginning of his Confessions, which is probably the first psychological document the world ever had, he starts with, I was not with you because I was not with myself. I was not with you because I was not with myself. It's right at the beginning of the Confessions. Brilliant, brilliant. I don't think you can be with God until you are first with yourself, which means you stop eliminating what you have judged to be unacceptable. But we got to still see how that is blinding you or how something is trapping you. So I'm going to define discernment as a trained awareness. A trained awareness of when an energy is true and centered and grounded, the true self, and when an energy is uncentered, ungrounded, and false self. That's all. And you can be trained in that. Although I'll bet every one of you in this room, women tend to be better at it, can read. You can tell when a person is a grounded, solid, real human being, that they're coming from their center. And so you've all got a foundation for reading this, but it usually hasn't been sophisticated. We could call the Enneagram homeopathic healing in a certain thing, that you are healed by the same thing that wounds you. Remember that? Moses holding up this snake which bit the people, and he says, those who look on the snake will be healed. Became the pharmacist symbol, very good symbol. But it's actually a symbol of homeopathic healing. That you've actually got to eat a little bit. It's all inoculations are based on the same thing. You nurses and doctors know that. You give a little piece of the disease to the person, help them deal with that little piece of the disease, and ironically that creates the protection against the disease. There it is, written into human biology, written into the nature of the universe. You can't just get rid of it. You make friends with your shadow, as it were. You tame your demons, as we said at the beginning. Moses insisted that the people bitten by the snake look upon it. And of course, then the cross became the new snake, the new wounding. We had said, whoever looks upon it will come to recognize what they're doing to goodness. The ultimate good one, Jesus for us, becomes the crucified one because that's what humanity does to goodness. It kills it. It hates it. It tortures it. It attacks it. It's the whole conflict that you see in the movie, The Passion, between religion and the good one is the archetypal pattern of how religion itself can be fooled. And how religion itself, which is supposedly the best thing, very often ends up being the worst thing when it doesn't learn how to see. So what we're saying in all this, if you've missed it so far, is that you cannot deny your basic personality. Right? Here's incarnational spirituality. You can't. You are who you are, And that's what God loves, and that's what God uses. But you've heard me enough now in these first hours that I'm not saying that in a glib, follow your bliss way, all right? It's much more difficult than that. The disidentification, the moving back into it without judgment. You cannot deny your basic personality. You must go on the same path for your recovery that you went on the fall. You will find spiritual growth by going back through the same experiences, ironically, that caused your problems in the first case. Right? But now you do them differently. That's why people can't let go of those primal hurts. If they were wounded by their father, they keep wanting to find a good father. If they were wounded by their mother, they keep being attracted to older women and relating to older women. Because where it was done wrong, I want to do it right. Right? And I want to find one good mother to heal the wound where I had the bad mother. That's just naming it. I hope we've come to see it. Actually, modern psychology has helped us to see it. So a 7, for example, just to use them as an example, does not become anything other than a 7. It's precisely through joy and happiness and seeing the risen life in all things that they will come to God. But now it's not the resurrection on this side of the crucifixion, it's the resurrection on the other side of the crucifixion. And that's the redeemed resurrection. You follow me? But it's still joy. My father was a 7. Had dementia the last 10 years of his life. But I remember walking in the home, and he could barely stand at the end. He lived till 89. But he jumped to his feet, smile from ear to ear, and call me by name, of course, and run toward me. I had a good father. But part of the reason I think he was so good is he was a 7. He never saw the bad side of any of us, It took a 7 to live a whole life of 50-some years with my mother, who was an 8, And you see, we tend to very often, you'll see this by the end of the day, it's amazing. I don't want to make this too fatalistic or deterministic, but you amazingly often marry the person right next to you because they are your flip and your opposite. Not always, but I'd say 60% of the time. They balance you out in some ways, and they really do. My mom and my dad balanced me out. My mother was always demanding. My father was always forgiving. And together it worked in our lives. At least I hope it did. Now, I want to say one more thing before we start moving into the individual types. How it's hard for each of us to live in the now in different ways. Because I am convinced that the purest form of spirituality is the ability to accept the sacrament of the present moment and to find God in the present moment. God people only live in the now in a shocked, overwhelmed way that makes them substitute, as I said before, their judgments for real contact or real presence. They are always carrying all kinds of unfelt, unprocessed emotion. Remember, shock wave every 3 minutes. You just can't process that much. It's way too much for 8s, 9s, and 1s. Everything is an overwhelming perception for us in our whole body. So we control it. And therefore, we have the hardest time living in the now. That's why I have to go apart. That's why I have to practice contemplation. It's the only way for me to accept the now and to process it in some way, ironically, by not processing it, by forgiving it and allowing it to be. They're continually being blown away by the strong gust of wind of the present, which is why the 9 just withdraws and stops feeling. It's too much. Can't process it. Can't deal with it. It's really a wonderful survival technique. Hard people have a very hard time living in the now because they are reacting to and carrying and trying to please everybody else's concerns. And they move toward action. Hard people have a very hard time with contemplation, with silence. It isn't, because their way of overcoming it, ironically, is action. Ours is to make judgments, to control it. Heart people do something. Serve you, decorate you, or make you an efficiency expert in some way. Huh? So they're always processing the past, which is why it's hard for heart people to forgive. Very hard. They just keep replaying how you offended them last month or last year or 10 years ago. And they jump into anxiety about the future. Neither place is the now, which is where everything happens. They're trapped in a flurry of now feelings, but the now feelings are not theirs. They're everybody else's. So you can see the wisdom of meditation. Why you've just got to keep, let go, let go. This feeling comes along and says, feel me, feel me. No, not now. Don't judge it, don't hate it. Just put it on a boat, as we say, and let it go down the river. Don't have to feel that feeling now. Don't have to foster that feeling. Don't have to feed that feeling. Most people, that's the name of the game, feeding their feelings. And soon they are possessed by a demon. That's the real meaning of being possessed. Now, head people are stuck in the present. They look like, and they love to sit quietly in meditation and contemplation, all right? But they do contemplation in an information gathering way, all right? Which does not allow them really to be present either. They have to withdraw in some sense to deal with all of the thoughts, data, and emotions that they're constantly trying to make sense out of. Huh? So they like maybe silence, they like to withdraw, but their problem is that they keep thinking inside of the now, huh? And keep processing inside of the now. So again, you can see why all great teachers of prayer are telling you to let go of your feelings, right? To let go of your addiction to your thoughts. And even to us body people, to try to sit in a way that is more holistic than just body awareness. Huh? And believe it or not, breathing can do the same, where it moves me to the more holistic self instead of just the body self. How do we resist? Gut people resist aggressively in a way that, frankly, and I've hurt people by this in my life, our quick responses will come across as quick and brusque and absolute and even harsh. Because what we're trying to do is stop the flood of perception that's coming toward us. So if you catch a gut person on the run when they've got a lot of tasks in hand, you're not going to get their best response. And you're going to take an offense from it, but you don't know that you have caused it. Right? That's why we're all of course, if you don't know someone well, you don't know that. But they're saying, stop the flood of perception. I can't take any more right now. The 8 will push you back, right? The 9 will simply sort of glaze over. And we 1s will try to fix you or change you. Terrible. Heart people resist in a way, frankly, that often feels manipulative. They will often feel invasive, intrusive. They'll often feel high maintenance. Like help me deal with my feelings. Give me time. Notice me. They'll demand to be noticed very often. Because they are, by definition, very needy people. Sorry to have to say it, but 2s, 3s, and 4s have a lot of needs, especially on the emotional level, for response. You see? For being taken care of, for being admired, for being liked, for being thought to be artistic, creative, special, whatever. So, I think that's pretty much all of my overview. And I hope it's enough that will now allow us to move in to individual spaces with some degree of preparation. How many minutes do we have, John? We have 10. Now, it's no surprise. Oh, didn't I say that? Forgive me. Mea culpa. The good boy wasn't good. He didn't do it right. Head people resist by being, of course, aloof and withdrawn. They go inside in some way and ruminate with their perceptions and their ideology try to revalidate what their existing ideology is, which is why they tend to be intellectual snobs. They tend to be conservative because everything has to go by the previous paradigm that is in place in my head. But now I'm going to talk right out of the opposite side of my mouth. When you get a 5, a 6, or a 7 who can really take risks and think creatively and do some good head work, they can be the most creative revolutionaries of all. But left to themselves in their compulsive form, your 5 and your 6 especially tend to be intellectual snobs, curmudgeons, always pulling everything back into when the truth really existed back in 1950, which just happened to be when they were a boy, Or if they studied the Greeks, it's when the Greeks were the real philosophers. You see this in a lot of conservative religion. It's these head people seeking control. And they tend to be very attracted to religion because it gives you that existing ideology which reassures you that you're right. And that's the overwhelming need of the head person. Reassurance on a head level that they are in control and they are right. The form it takes is what we call fundamentalism, and it's happening all over the world. If it's true that 50% of the human race are 6s, you can see we got a problem. And if we don't expose, in the good sense, the nature of fear and the utterly binding and blinding quality of fear, I think the world is going to be led down all kind of roads by fear-based people who have never had to face fear for the demon that it is, but it's always been called virtue. Okay, we do have a couple minutes of just overall questions on anything I've tried to say up to now. And then after this, we will start going into the numbers one by one. Yes? Mm-hmm.
You mentioned earlier in your talk about strengths and gifts. Do you find those to be sort of the same, or are they sort of different? Or
Strengths.
Strengths and gifts.
Oh, well, I could do that before the break. I bet we got time. Just to name them. That would be nice. Now, remember that I'm going to, because I'm coming from the faith background, I'm going to first of all correlate these to the classic capital sins. There were 7 of them. We added 2, the 3 and the 6, fear and deceit. And is it an accident or not that fear and deceit tend to be the demons, in my opinion, that are controlling the West? Because we never recognize the 3 and the 6 as capital sins, right? And we'll explain that as we go through. But let me start with the 1. Our capital sin, our weakness, there's a lot of different words used for it. The best word for it is resentment. All right. I'm not going to describe them in great length. The capital name was anger, of course. The opposite of that, which I hope you'll see in me sometimes today, I hope it's there, is in fact the exact opposite, serenity. That I'm actually better at overcoming anger than the rest of you because it's been my demon all my life, do you see? And I'm sick of it. And I don't believe it, and I don't trust it, and I don't always follow it. When I'm my best self, I'm going to be the most serene of all of you. Isn't that wonderful? I mean, for those of you who are ones, that gives you a little hope, doesn't it? The sin of the 2, now they all take description, is pride. It's not the usual sense of vanity or conceit. It's a sense of far outweighing their importance in your life. Right? They ingratiate themselves and make you need them, and then hate you if you don't need them enough. Do you understand? That grandiosity of ego, that constantly pushing themselves into institutions and relationships as, aren't I important? Aren't I wonderful? Aren't I absolutely essential to the task? My love is saving you. That, in fact, becomes their blindness. When they face it, I always say, they cry for 3 days. It's very humiliating for a 2 to face that self-centeredness of their love, and they flip into their greatest gift, which is humility. I know that in a lot of my friends who are 2s. They actually can end up becoming more humble than most people because they've seen the phoniness of their love. And for some reason, for the soul, nothing is more humiliating than to see the phoniness of your love. You want to cry. You just, oh, damn it. I thought I was being so good, and I wasn't being good to you at all. I was being good to me. Ooh, that's painful. And the pain is so great in the good sense that it makes them into very humble people. If they can keep recognizing that fallibility of their love. The 3, which was one of the denied, it wasn't in the original capital sins, is deceit. This doesn't mean they go around telling lies, right? They wouldn't be so gross as to do that. It just means they embellish the truth. They put their best foot forward. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you show your best looking face? We're all 3s in that sense, huh? We try to, embroider the truth, and we try to hide the shadow. They're natural salesmen without even trying, without even working at it. They know how to sell a product and tell you what's great about it. But again, first of all, they sell themselves. I mentioned before that when they face that, they become great lovers of integrity and truth. And that's their virtue, which is exactly the opposite of their deceit. Yes? Integrity or truth. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That they become lovers of integrity and truth. It may be time for one more, at least the 4. This is again revealing the subtlety of the 4 in many ways. The sin of the 4 is envy. We'll take longer time to describe it this afternoon. But they have an immediate eye. It's spontaneous. For class, for taste, for that looks good, that sounds good, that smells good. They can't help it. They're classy people, And it's the French who've made an art form out of it, It's the Japanese in the Orient, the same thing. You just go to Japan and you just think you're in a constant art museum. How can any one country be so beautiful? Beauty is paramount to the 4. And they can't help it. Now, their virtue, when they stop getting into this envy of people who are, oh, she's prettier than I am, or he's more artistic than I am, or he's getting promoted in the job of writing and I'm not, that's hard for them to accept. Anybody who's classier than they are, more talented than they are, getting promoted by reason of their gift, and I'm not. And it can really blind them. There's many novels and movies in history about the rage of the rejected 4, right? Whose art form is not appreciated or whose art form is not loved. When they can weep over that, they flip into what we call equanimity, a kind of even-souledness. That's literally what it means. A kind of ability, and this also creates even greater art in them, that subtlety of good and bad, that subtlety of darkness and light. And that's why they're masters of subtlety. They face subtlety in themselves instead of looking for, a total perfect artist and now I'm totally bad, a total failure. They have to learn that the truth is somewhere in between. And when they learn to honor that truth and love that truth that's in between, they in fact emerge with their greatest gift. So let's take another 5-minute stand-up break, and we'll start on the numbers as such in the next session.